because I don't want to hear any more bananas or grapefruits.
Now you keep mentioning it.
I was going to say,
I'm obsessed with it now.
And you even got the wrong fruit, but still.
No,
I saw a video online of a banana being fed through a turbocharger today.
It was a technique I learned in a choir that if you didn't know the word.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are here watching YouTube, you can actually join this conversation, no matter how many bananas we talk about. You can join the conversation by clicking on the Zoom link that's below. If you're in Zoom and you're looking at all these fine panelists and you're thinking, when we talk, you'll think that you know more than us, and you might. And we would love to have you actually join the panel and become part of this. We have somehow collected centuries of experience. We're going for a millennia. So if you have a lot of experience and you'd like to share it with everybody else, this is a great panel to do it in. We start informally at about 5. We start talking. At 6, we kind of start the pre-show. It's kind of like the second breakfast, and we start kind of just kind of getting our tea and coffee together. Then at 6:40. We do mic checks. Once we do the mic checks, we're kind of done. We're not going to add more people to the panel for the day. We also hand out the Discord link at that point in time. That's the one place where you can join, because just talking about this every day isn't enough. We have to keep talking about it online. So Discord is where you can do that, but the link is usually expired by the time we start the show. So just keep that in mind. The first hour is general Q&A. This show is really truly by us for us. So we are, the whole show runs on your questions. So we don't have we have a little bit of an agenda, but not much. Your job as an attendee is to ask those questions. Our job is to discuss them. I'd like to say that we're going to answer them. And I can't promise that part, but I can say that we will discuss your questions and try to get to something that looks like an answer. And so that's the first hour is the general discussion. Second hour is usually something that we're talking about specifically, like, hey, let's talk about this thing. So today we're going to talk about cameras, like why we choose cameras. We've been talking about sensors and lenses and lots of other things, but today we're going to talk about how we choose that. Tomorrow, Andy Anako is going to join us. So that's we're pretty excited about having. He's an old friend of mine, and just an illustrious career of writing and hosting. So he's going to be joining us for that second hour. So make sure to tune in for that. So that gives you kind of an example of what those second hours look like. If you'd like to share this, you can. What you want to do is not use the link that you got, but use the link that I just posted into Makana. That is the one that you want to use to become part of it. And that's pretty much how it runs. Bill, I'm going to hand it off to you. I have a couple moving parts here in my production. This is a shoot week for me, a virtual shoot week. So we have people all over the world shooting, and we're watching through Zoom. But people are setting up their kits and putting things together, and so I have to go tend to that. This week is a little heavy, and then things will get back to normal next week. But I will be here with the Andy Notko one, but I'm going to drop out and let Bill take over for the day. So thank you all. It's good seeing you. I was glad to see a little bit of you guys in the pre-show, and good to see you all here. And I'll see you tomorrow. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex, and have a great shoot. Right, let's see. Rather than run all the questions myself, Guy or Chris, either of you want to do that, or I'll stumble through? I'll stumble through. Though I guess I see no hands being raised.
I can go for it, Bill. That's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah. All right. First one's up
the most
with
dependable
Doug.
person on the group.
I try to be. I got a show to do at 10, so I'm kind of up against the wall too, but we'll make it work.
If you have any trouble toward the end and need to get out early, just dump it to me and we'll be fine.
Right on. All right, first one comes in from Doug Ferguson in Fort Wayne, Indiana. What NVIDIA graphics card is the best bang for the buck?
Okay, this should be worth talking about. We'll go with Jeffrey and then Stuart. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So NVIDIA cards, they come in many different flavors. They have the 1000 model, the 2000 model, the 3000 model, which is the more recent one. You have what's called a GTX versus a RTX card. GTX is Giga Texy, and RTX is ray tracing. If you're going to do any type of VR, you want to have an RTX card. In streaming, when you're talking about software streaming, I'm not sure about hardware streaming, but with software streaming, a lot of it's done on the CPU side, but when you send out your video signal, especially if you're sending it out to multiple locations, you'll want to have a good card on there. With that being said, I have the three main types of models. You have the 60, the 70, and the 80 versions. So it's like the 30, 60, 30, 70, 30, 80. I have the 2070, which is a step down from the 2080, which is the best model in that version. They in these cases, they have the GDDR6 memory in them, and they do a really good job for what I'm doing for my streaming. And if I need to record and stream to two locations, I'm pretty much set. The 3000 model will let you do a little bit more, but once again, it really depends on your hardware and the software that you're using.
Jeffrey, before Stuart weighs in, if your card blew up tomorrow and you had to replace it, what price point would you be looking at? Because he's interested in best bang for the buck. Where would you go?
Well, the 2070 at the time was around the $400 mark. It might be a little bit less now, but we're talking under $500.
Great. Stuart?
Well, first up, I'm going to have to ask Doug a question, and I will explain why we need to know the question after I've asked it, and that is, what software are you running it on, or running on that? Because not only is there the different levels of performance that Jeffrey went through, there's also a very big difference between the consumer level cards, whether they're a GT or GTX or RTX, and the professional level cards that are sold as Quadros and the like. The specific difference that matters for streaming is the number of concurrent H.264 encodes you can do in hardware. On the GTXs, you can only do 2. On the GTs, you can't do any. On the Quadros and the like, the Tesla cards, you can do as many until the hardware fails, as in until you run out of bandwidth for it. So if you're running something like vMix, like I am, a card with only 2 NVSync encoders, I think I've got that right, will do, say, an NDI out and a H.264 out, and that's it. Whereas the professional level cards, you can run multiple streams, and it's all done in GPU. So, Doug, what are you running on the computer, and what do you need to render out?
Well, it's a very specific program called CharacterWorks. It's an online broadcast software, and its main purpose, it sends NDI out to the TriCaster. So right now I currently have a 10.
Professional cards would be more important, because if you're doing NDI hardware encoding, you're going to be limited to 2 streams on the consumer level cards. So even though the professional cards are more expensive, they might actually be better value for money for you.
Did that take care of your question, Doug, or do you want us to go farther into it?
Yeah, no, I was running a 1050, and that particular computer lately has been blue screening, and so I have replaced it with a new computer, and just wanted to pick brains here to see what people think of.
Jeffrey has a note for you.
Current level graphics cards.
Yeah, if you're doing only NDI out, that's one single one. If NDI out's going to like multiple machines to capture, that doesn't matter. It's more the fact of just being the one NDI. So I think if you're on that 20 series or getting a lower end Quattro, then you should be good to go with that. I don't think it's going to take up that much power for the sending it out.
Okay, hopefully that answered your question. Let's move on. And this is Guy asking Guy to answer Guy's question.
Alrighty, what specific audio track do you like to use to test sound equipment?
This should be fun. Now you're talking about an audio performance, like a song or something like that, like we'd take them into a speaker array to test speakers.
Exactly. If you were to go into a stereo shop, or if you're testing out some new cans, or if you're testing out whatever sound gear, maybe some AirPod Pros that you want to listen to.
Okay. Well, then let's start with Mickey, because Mickey will have good advice, and then we're going to go around. I'll do Mickey, and then TJ Asher, then Stuart, then Jeff. Go ahead.
Right. If I'm testing, say, microphones, I'd like to test with a human voice, just because we are so attuned to the sound of the sound of human voice, so we can tell the little intricacies of, say, like hearing someone in person, as opposed to their voice going through a microphone, going through a system. If I'm testing something to monitor, like say speakers or headphones, then it's quite the cliche, but I use Steely Dan tracks and also Fleetwood Mac tracks, because my folks have been listening to them since like I 4 years old, or six. I was 4 years old, so I know them by heart.
I want Phil Collins drums if I'm going to test them. Go ahead, TJ.
For testing speakers and headphones and the like, I listened to the album Double Vision by Bob James and David Sanborn, and I know that album inside and out, and I know how it should sound on really, really, really nice speakers. And so that is sort of my baseline. The other thing I'll use is I have a copy of the Telarc Digital Sampler 1 CD, and to test the overall power output and handling capability, the recording of Superman, the final 15 seconds of that song will bring most systems to their knees. There is so much power in that. And if it can handle that last little bit of that song, it's a good system.
Interesting. Stuart and Jeff?
If I'm wanting to play something to test both the vision and sound of, say, a theatre and what have you, the Fifth Element DVD. It is one of the best encodes that was ever done for DVD, and the sound dynamics are fabulous. If I'm testing a PA system at a pub for a live gig to happen, the Angels, Am I Ever Gonna See Your Face Again? 2 reasons. I know the guitar riff really well, so I can tell whether the speaker's working, but it also gets the crowd pumped up.
Jeff Francis, and then we'll finish with Jeffrey Powers. Go ahead, Jeff.
I have 2 tracks that I start with. The first is Yo-Yo Ma, Edgar Meyer, Mark O'Connor, and James Taylor doing Stephen Foster's Hard Times Come Again No More from Appalachian Journey. So it starts with a string trio, which shows me stereo and a full range of frequencies. And then James Taylor's voice comes in. And if it sounds like James Taylor, we're in good shape. Second track, something completely different, is from the band Live. And it's a song called Sparkle, because it starts out with just a kick and a snare, and then lots of distorted guitars and other things.
And Jeffrey Powers.
I got a couple for any type of live mixing. I use a couple tracks of Dave Matthews Band, because it's got a whole range of frequencies in their music. If I am trying to test out speakers and I want to get the full range in the first couple minutes, I will go with Mars from Holst the Planets. There's also a Rachmaninoff song that I can't think of. And then finally, there's an there's a album out there, and I'm trying to find it, but I haven't found it yet. That's basically nothing but frequency changes. So it'll test the highs, the lows. It'll give you white noise. It'll give you left channel, right channel to test on the stereo. And if of course if it's 7.1, there's also a version that'll do 7.1 as well.
Fair enough. And if you like masked voices, you can find a copy of Carl Orff's Carmina Burana, which has it's an oratorio that has huge masked voices that I always love listening to through a really good stereo. Moving on, let's go.
Actually, I didn't get to do mine. Okay.
Don't get
the
you,
ones that I like to listen to are
definitely. Yeah, please, guy.
Aaron Neville, Everybody Plays the Fool is one, and the Bonnie Raitt Silver Lining soundtrack, and then Jazz at the Pawn Shop are 3 that I know really well for high-end systems. So
Aaron Neville has one of the most distinctive voices I have ever heard, and I just think it's magic. So I would listen to him regardless.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, next one's up from Tom R. in Irving, Texas. He says, what is the group's current opinions regarding NDI and bringing multiple remote cameras into OBS, Wirecast, etc.? Is reliability mostly acceptable?
So who are our NDI and OBS people? Stuart, we're going to start with you.
NDI good, NDI HX bad. Bad, really bad. Don't use it. And NDI should only be used on an intranet, not the internet. That's from practical experience. It eats network bandwidth like you wouldn't believe. If you need to go across the internet, use SRT instead.
Would you consider the reliability of regular NDI to be dependable, acceptable, mostly acceptable?
I'm using it every day, every time I'm on here.
Okay, so it's been solid as a rock for you. So I guess there's not a big
but it
problem.
matched the drivers across every system that you're using.
So that is important for people who want to get NDI up and to run
yeah.
reliably. So pay attention to your driver installs. Let's do Jeffrey Powers, then TJ Asher after that.
First of all, from last question, the name of the album is called The Ultimate Headphones Test. That's what I use for testing headphones. So with that said, with NDI, I kind of disagree a little bit with Stuart on the HX part. It really depends on what you're going to be using your NDI with. If you're using, like, for instance, this type of situation where it's a talking head and you're using NDI, that's full NDI is definitely the way to go. If you're putting an NDI camera up in the rafters to get an overview look, HX, or you're doing a presentation, a keynote or something like that, HX is a better way to go, I think, personally. With that said, make all your NDI devices, well, actually, before I say this, it depends on the hardware you get, because some hardware will work with NDI perfectly. Others you'll have problems left and right. And then finally, with that all said, make sure that each NDI device has a static IP rather than a dynamic IP, and you'll have a better time using it.
Okay, good. I like divergence opinions are good. So let's go back to Stuart just for a moment, because he raised his hand as soon as he heard something. So you may have the, and then we'll go to Jeffrey to TJ to finish up after that.
My own experience with HX devices. Firstly, HX is NDI extra long GOP, and it was designed by NewTek to be used with their own Wi-Fi connected devices, and those devices are trash. I've seen them drop out less than 5 meters away from a Wi-Fi hub. And when it drops out, it can be 30 seconds before the stream comes back in, or it might not come back in at all. And that's NewTek's own NDI HX hardware.
Which is why I said it's a non-use, lower use camera.
Okay, yeah. So there's cases where it will work, but be careful. That's what the message I'm getting out of this. TJ, you want to add something to the discussion? And then we'll go to Guy.
I have a question really about the NDI. Frequently here we've seen where Guy or Jeffrey or Paul will go into Hulk mode because of NDI, and something just seems to go haywire with NDI. And Alex always says, NDI, I will never use it for anything live production. So I'm just wondering, why is NDI seemingly so popular, yet people don't seem to really trust it?
And for those of you who are listening and not watching, Hulk mode is a thing that happens where the picture turns magenta and green in the weirdest way possible. And you're going, what happened to that person? And then usually it goes away after a short period of time. And we've been trying to track down why that mode happens since it first happened here on the show. So let's continue through the process. Guy had his hand up after that. Then we'll go back to...
To circle back to the original question, regarding Jeff Keithley is probably the biggest proponent around here regarding NDI. What he does is he has it on site being encoded to SRT, goes up to the cloud, and then comes back down. So if you're talking, the question specifically says remote cameras. So you want to convert NDI to SRT and then suck it back in and convert it back to NDI at the other side. And there's devices that'll do that, and there's they get pricey. For the latency part, so we're talking about two things. One's quality and one's latency. So you could use something like Zoom to be able to do like PTZ control, because you're under 500 milliseconds for control. So sometimes with SRT, you're getting up to a second of delay, which could be unacceptable if you're trying to rack focus or something like that. Regarding Hulk mode, I figured out that between Zoom and vMix, there's a pull that happens at first when it checks to the color space. And so what I've been doing is I'll make it happen. I'll force it to happen with my Zoom room. So I'll pin myself with the Zoom room, and that'll knock it to the green mode for just a second. And then it'll figure out that auto negotiation, and then it won't happen again. So that's why, Mickey, if you're wondering why the Zoom room's in, it's because I pinned myself, and you'll see me turn Hulk green, and I'll pin almost everybody. I'll walk around the whole panel and pin everybody just to check if anybody's having any issues.
Interesting. Okay, Stuart, Jeffrey, then Doug. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, following on the Hulk mode there, that's really interesting to know, Guy, because what I did to get rid of it on my system was make sure that my vMix system is outputting the same frame size and frame rate that the virtual input is set to on my laptop with Zoom. So they're all the same version driver, same frame rate, same resolution all the way through, and it went away.
Nice. Jeffrey?
Yeah, we should definitely compare notes, because what I've been finding is every time that happened, the audio was the determining the changing factor of things. So you'd be sitting there not talking to Zoom at all, and all of a sudden you raise your hand and Alex or somebody would, like Bill, would call on you, and then you would turn on your audio, and that's when the explosion would happen. So I think there has something to do with the audio, just
Jeffrey,
a little bit, but I
at the
definitely
same
like to
time
compare
as-
those notes.
Jeffrey, at the same time the audio changes, your output video changes, because you go from sending the thumbnail size image to sending your full broad or full size image for Zoom for whichever.
Well, yeah, more bandwidth coming through, yeah.
You
Yes.
follow what I mean. I'm
Okay.
stumbling on the words tonight.
Doug, go ahead.
So I live in the new tech world. So NDI for me is an everyday thing too. But to TJ's point, why NDI is good for some things is not good for others. It's ease of use for my case. I don't ever use NDI for something critical. And I learned the hard way too. I could have a whole hour just talking about production problems in NDI. But NDI in my world is a must because because of ease of use, and I'll go into it. If I need to send the video signal to the client on site, and I can set up a laptop. If it's on the same network, I can just send anything I want to it. But if I have a camera coming back to our production truck, I never, if I can possibly do it, I never use NDI coming back or for critical video. But it's just ease of use. And in worlds that if you have a studio and a system that is constantly in, like you set it up once and it stays there, like schools or churches, those environments do better than, say, my environment where every show is different, and you have to be really good in the IT world to make sure your video works, because NDI definitely relies on switches and Ethernet ports, and there's a lot to it, but I've learned by pain. But it is what it is.
Okay, Paul Wallace wanted to pop in on this. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I was having a lot of issues like Guy was for a long time. You guys might remember, when, I hulked out frequently. And since then, I haven't had any hulking issues. And gosh, NDI is so great for all these old cell phones and tablets that are laying around to repurpose them. It's just a matter of figuring out how to best mount them and position them and utilize them. Now that I say this, probably I'll start hulking again, just because I say I've got the problem solved. And maybe Guy has some insight into why that happens. I'm curious as to what causes that.
Well, Stuart's got his hand up, and then after Stuart, we'll finish up with Guy, and then he can go right into the next question. So go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, I'm just noting that there's another NDI-based question in the list with asking specifically what the difference is between NDI and NDI HX. NDI is an MPEG-4 stream. NDI HX is an extra long group of pictures, GOP, version of NDI, and it is also a lower data rate. So it's just a lot longer between keyframes.
Okay. Guy?
Yeah, there's a lot more to setting these things up. I wish it was just plug and play, and it can be with NDI HX, but if you want to use full NDI, you really need to have a proper switch. I mean, you can't just get an off-the-shelf, plain vanilla $50 switch and expect it to have the backplane to provide the throughput that full NDI requires, especially if you're going up to 4K. So even on the NDI camera that I'm testing right now, we're doing a production today, and I'll use the NDI for camera control, but I'm not using the output out of it. I'm still sucking it in SDI and running into an AJU tap. So I have both, just in case. But if I'm going to be running cables for a show, I'm going to have both SDI and if it's practical, or go SDI to fiber. But yeah, you might want to look at PTZ Optics has a NDI data sheet that shows the basics of setting up MDNS, IGMP snooping. So there's a couple things in the back end of your switch or your gateway that you need to set up to ensure. And actually, we carved out a separate VLAN entirely so that no other IoT devices or anything that's on the network is interfering. Because, and then there's another thing called a discovery server that if you want the real reliability, you got to have a dedicated discovery server as well. So there's a lot more to it. And I wish Jeff Keithley was here to come in and rattle off a few things. I mean, we should have a whole second hour on NDI because there is a lot to it. And once it's properly configured, it runs like a champ. There's a lot of people who just think that it's plug and play. It is not. It is not
But
just plug and
you're
play. You
not
might get
running
lucky, but
your Wi-Fi enabled coffee maker off the same loop. I'm shocked.
All right, are we ready for the next one?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, let's go on over to Jonas Details. Best headset mic for an intercom with mass and talking silently since we are in the same room as the people.
So this sounds to me like it's a comms during a show kind of thing. If those of you who have been on an IFB or a comms system, you know that you keep your voice way down because usually there's a CEO or somebody talking. So if you don't get very quiet about things, people get really upset at you. So I'm assuming they're talking about doing something now that we're all masked, where you can both work on a comm system and monitor what's going on. Anybody want to talk about this? Roscoe wants to get it.
Yeah, I threw in the link for a singing mask, which actually allows you to put the microphone inside the mask, and we use those for production. You do sound like you're talking into a coffee cup or a styrofoam coffee cup a little bit,
yeah.
But it's just a question of putting that mask in a place where it's not blocking the sound hitting the microphone element. So something to consider.
Yeah, and I will say that good comm systems, the ClearComms and the other ones, are so sensitive that they are better for that kind of purpose than trying to run off a phone, headset that has a microphone on it. Go ahead, Mickey, and then TJ Asher. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in a question to Jonas. What system are you using? Are you on ClearComm, RTS, or what? Because that would sort of determine the selection that's out there. But if you say you're using something like Unity, Tucker recommends the Blue Parrot 450. It's a Bluetooth headset for comms.
Okay, TJ?
Would one of those throat microphones be applicable in this situation? I'm not sure. I don't know how they work very well if you needed to be quiet. I know they're made for like a loud environment where you can't hear the vocals, so it's picking from your throat and picking up that sub-vocalization. I just wonder if that would be a thing you could use.
I've been on a shoot or two with something really quiet, like a solo pianist playing very quietly. And so I found myself, without using full voice, truly whispering and you could tell the people on the comms needed to get enough gain on there to be able to hear instructions clearly. You can do that with those things. Also, most of the comm systems, they all have different things. I think most of the ClearComm stuff is a 4-pin XLR. If I remember correctly, I think there's some 5-pin systems. So whatever you're adapting, you have to pay attention to how it's terminated and what your system's in. Stuart, you want to weigh in on that?
Just free thinking ideas and what have you, and stuff that's probably 10 years off. If anyone from Elon Musk's Neuralink company is listening, intercoms for broadcast will probably be about as popular as intercoms for military, where you have the little thing all the way inside your skull and just think to your fellow soldier or broadcaster.
I'm not sure if I'm ready for an implant yet. Anybody else have anything, or are we moving on? Looks like we're moving on. Hopefully that helped you, Jonas. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was hoping that we would get a totally solid answer because I have the same issue today. We wound up, based on Brian Maddox's recommendation, going with $79. I'm forgetting the name of the model off the top of my head. I want to say it was some kind of poly solution. I'll put it in the chat here when I go back to my Amazon store and find it. But I've had the same issue at church where I have to whisper to a guy and we're listening to the show, and we have to remove, even though I have Unity comms ready to go, I just can't find anything because the church congregation's right in front of us and I want to whisper. I don't want to talk loud, so I need a boom right in front of my mouth. So I'm trying to find something because we're each wearing AirPods, but you'd have to talk really loud with AirPods. And I get exactly what he's talking about. You need something discreet. So I might go with Alex's option of that Blue Parrot 450. I think they're like $150 or something like that. That might be
nice.
The way to go. All right, so we'll go on next to Angela Eiserman's question. Any good office chair for under 200 that doesn't have a high back?
Ooh, that's going to be a little tough because I was lucky. Somebody gave me a wonderful Aeron chair, one of my relatives decades ago. So I've gotten chairs off of my things, but I do notice that as somebody who shoots a lot of people, if you put any kind of a swivel chair or any kind of a movable chair on a set, people will eventually fidget. They always start squeaking. And that's my concern with inexpensive chairs, is the squeak factor. So we got a few hands up. So let's start with Jeffrey, go to Paul, and then Stuart. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Interesting enough, you should be able to find, because having a Herman Miller chair is one of the things that a lot of people strive for, because it has that that net back and everything like that. But that's usually like $500 and up. However, if you go to the office, especially now if you go to office stores, because they're probably hurting. Here in Wisconsin, we have a thing called swap, and what it is any government agency cannot sell what they have just to the regular public. They have to go through a third party. So the third party is a university extension called swap, which then takes the products. They have to pay to have them pick that stuff up, and then they end up selling those products at dirt cheap prices, including chairs. I mean, we're talking $600 chairs for $25. You're in New York, so I'm guessing there's going to be something very similar to that you might want to check in on, and you'll be able to find a chair for dirt cheap.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Stuart, go ahead, and then Paul Wallace.
Oh, I thought there was somebody else before me, but
actually, I think I had it the order reversed. So let's do Paul first and then Stuart. I didn't write that down. I'm sorry. Paul, go ahead.
Okay, I'll take it. Yeah, I have a new Aeron chair. They're wonderful. I've loved the Herman Miller line for a long time. I really like the older vintage Herman Miller chairs that are upholstered. They're like green and they're upholstered. The problem is that a lot of those break down. So you have to be really careful when you go to like a used furniture place or you go on Facebook Marketplace. By the way, I like Facebook Marketplace better than Craigslist these days. And be careful that you get one that works. It's not broken down. As long as you can elevate it and lower it, and all the controls work. Really check out the vintage Herman Miller chairs as opposed to the more recent Aeron chairs. Over to Stuart.
Angela's question doesn't say whether, like she says, it doesn't have a high back. She doesn't say whether she needs it to have a low back or no back. Because if it's no back, the simple solution is a good office chair that you just disassemble and remove the back. If it's a mid-height back, you can buy those separately, like instead of a really high one, or you could use a grinder and just remove the excess. But one solution that I'm looking at, given that I've bought extras from my car, is actually putting a captain's chair out of the back of a Chrysler Voyager on a platform. So then I will have the back support, I will have the lumbar support, the arms, and a cup holder. And the chairs cost me under, well, actually the full set of chairs from a local wreckers cost me under $150 Australian. So that's a bench and two captain's chairs. So you could probably go to an automotive wreckers and pick up something you can put on a platform, and you won't be able to wiggle it side to side.
Just get them out of a car that had a non-smoker owner. Stephen Kimbrough and then TJ Asher.
Also, if it's no back, drummer's throne. I love mine.
Oh, there you go. That makes sense.
Works great.
Yeah, and they can swivel and silently, I would imagine. Go ahead, TJ.
Yeah, drummer's throne, good option. Or if you look for a physician's stool, the old-fashioned physician's stool. If you need no back, or a yoga ball. Sit on a yoga ball if you want. Again, it's if you don't want to have anything visible behind you, like you can see the back of my chair sometimes behind me, but it just depends on the need. Or also those knee chairs that you don't see much of. My wife uses one where you kind of sort of semi-kneeling on the thing, no back on any of those either.
Great. We're going to move on to the next question, but I do want to remind everybody that we are getting low on questions in the initial queue, so definitely pop in there. Today is the camera discussion for the second hour, so put more things in for the main discussion here. We'd love to have you propose questions for the group that we can generally deal with, but then if you want something specifically in the second hour discussion, put camera up front in parentheses or not. Just make sure it's bold enough so we can see it, and we'll deal with those through the second hour. So we're counting on all of our viewers to keep the discussion going with interesting topics, which is exactly where Guy is going to go next by asking the next question.
All right, next one is from TJ in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Thinking of Bill and the voice booth, it seems to me that the new MacBook Air without any fan at all would be a great computer to use for recording in a voice booth. Thoughts from the panel?
Since I mentioned it, I'm definitely looking at that very, very closely. I am in because I've done a lot of advertising work for retail for so often, I tend not to spend any money in the fourth quarter because usually our huge quarter is the third quarter. I never know how the first part of the next year is gonna shape up. So I'm being a little conservative and not just running out and buying something and not sure that it's going to work correctly so that I have to take it back. But I am very, very, very interested in the new MacBook Air that has no fan specifically for this application. If it'll run my audio interfaces and do everything that I need to do in a MacBook Pro in the past, on an Air without a fan, that would be a huge plus for me in the voice booth. Also, because it's not forcing out a lot of heat into the room, because that gets tiresome if you lock yourself in a voice booth for long periods of narration, as I have. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, so what are the Thunderbolt options for best audio inputs? Because it's obviously going to be a Thunderbolt only input.
Well, you said the word best. Most people consider the universal audio interfaces to be the best. They are pretty expensive. Even the basic model runs $400 plus, sometimes $500, depending on whether you can find it at a discount. The Aero up at the high end runs almost $1,000. It has lauded preamps in it, and the new ones run off USB-C or Thunderbolt. So you'll get really high bandwidth in and out of it. You should have no latency issues whatsoever. If you want to take a step down from that, the one that I use and have for probably, I guess 3 or 4 years now, is the Zoom TAC2 Thunderbolt controller. And that goes into any of my Thunderbolt equipped laptops and gives me nice clean preamps and a big honkin' knob that I use for volume control, which is when you're trying to dial levels in, it's nicer to have that. We hear all these stories of the people who have fiddly small knobs on something that's designed for field production, and they're trying to use it as a desktop production mixer. It gets a little hard to tune in your volume that way.
So my only concern then becomes you only have 2 USB ports. One of them you're going to have power. Now you can put a smart hub of some sort. OWC has some pretty good solutions, and the Apple USB adapter, which breaks out to an HDMI and a USB, also has a power input on it, which is a nice little thing. But that's the only limitation is your interface and the fact that you only have 2 I shouldn't say USB-C because they're not USB, they are Thunderbolt. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thunderbolt 4 ports or whatever they're on.
Yeah, they're compatible. And I have always done OSC expansion ports on all of my machines. I tend to buy the big ones. I can't remember the model, but I've got one here and I've got one in my voice booth. So that's pretty much taken care of. But yes, people are talking pretty highly of the new OSC one.
OWC.
OWC. Thank you. OWC 1-in, 4-out port expander that should really
but they're not shipping yet, so that's there's just things to be aware of.
Yeah, that's true. You're going to have to get by. For me, I think one connection to the laptop and one connection to the power, and I'm suspicious of the fact that I might be able to get by with that in the voice booth and get rid of some stuff, extra equipment gear. Anything else on that, or are we going to just move on? Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, Guy.
Next one's coming in from Mark Harder in Brooklyn. Have you had remote presenters driving PowerPoint on a machine in studio, not their own remote machine? There appears to be a way in Zoom to give mouse control to the remote presenter, and I have a client saying they do this all the time.
Running presentations from a remote control. I want to make sure I understand this. Remote presenters driving PowerPoint. So this would be over the net or some sort of a dial-in connection. Mouse control remotely for your Zoom presentation. Doug Ferguson has his hand up.
Yes, I was on a show and they used a website called Internet Clicker. It was really simple. It's a pay service, but I think it's really inexpensive. And all you do is you run it. It's a plugin on PowerPoint, and it creates a code. You put that code in on the remote side, and you're controlling your own show.
You would think that with all the IR remote controls that can advance slides and do basic stuff out there, that somebody would have done a little interface somehow to do that, but I'm not aware of one. Jeffrey?
So yeah, I looked this up. Ever since Office 2013, there's a support page on this whole thing right here. And ever since 2013, they have a way to do a remote viewing service. So you can definitely check that page out. I put it into the Discord.
Okay, so it's in the Discord link or the Mukana?
Or not, I'm sorry, Mukana.
Mukana, fair enough. So you can find it in the Mukana chat system here and follow that down, because I don't know why, but I couldn't read that. That didn't come across clearly on my screen. Okay, anything else on that, or are we moving along? I guess we're moving along. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, just for the people at home or not looking in the chat, it's kind of funny because Matt and I at 7:40:05 a.m. said pickle remote works really well. Both of us at the same exact time step. So for those of you listening audibly and doing other stuff, there you go. Pickle remote's another option. Moving on to the next one, Sam Greenwood out of Toronto says, what's the difference between NDI and NDI HX?
I think Stuart pretty much covered this earlier. Do we have anything to add to that, or are we just there will be a timestamp earlier. Hopefully this will get into that. But if not, look, if you're referencing when it came up in the show, I'm telling you, go back and look in the show earlier. We had that as a discussion already. Okay, moving on. Oh, wait, John Preto has his hand up.
Just as a side note, yesterday they released a version of HX specifically for the NVIDIA cards. That's supposed to be a new whiz-bang 4K, 120 frames per second using the new NVIDIA cards.
Do the release notes say anything about stability improvements so that we can make Stuart happy?
I didn't see that. That's funny.
Okay. Fair enough. Moving along.
Next one is from Jeff Francis. Basic 1500 VA UPS. How often should I replace the batteries? Any recommendations for sources of batteries?
Those universal power supplies are uninterruptible power supplies, depending on I don't even know what kind of batteries do they use. Do they use marine batteries or something like that? What do you, well, anyway, let's let people who know them talk about them. Stuart has a battery held in his hand, and then we'll go to John Preto after that. Go ahead, Stuart.
This is actually the one out of a slightly smaller UPS because it was still in reach, literally about 30 centimeters in front of my knees. They're a lead acid gel cell. There is no use by date or the like listed on these sorts of batteries. You basically use them until they fail. So the simple way to test them is put a load on your UPS on a regular basis and run a stopwatch and see how long it takes before it switches off. But do it outside of an actual work situation because you don't want it to die, or if you at least know how long it's going to take, you know how long you're going to have to shut it off. And I'm sure Mickey has got a whole lot more information on that than I have.
Okay, John, then Paul, then Mickey. Go ahead, John.
I have 3 American power conversions sitting on all sides of me. I just happen to have a battery lamp plus place right next to my house, and they sell those specific cells for my UPS over there. I just take over the old ones over there, and they're super easy to replace. And I use them till they die, which is usually in between 5 to 7 years.
Is that like a motorcycle battery form factor or something like that? It looked pretty familiar
Close.
to me.
Very close, yeah.
Close. Roscoe's shaking his head no, so there must be something different about them. We were going to Paul and then Mickey after that. Go ahead, Paul.
I use an inverter as opposed to a UPS, which I run off continuously. I'm not using it right now, but normally I do that. And so I'd like Stuart at the end maybe to discuss the pros and cons of an inverter versus a UPS that cuts in when you need it versus an inverter which is always on when you're using it.
Let's listen to Mickey first, and then we'll go to Stuart for a wrap up if he's happy.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a terminology thing, but a good majority of the UPSs run on what's called sealed lead acid. Maybe that's also the same thing as gel cells, as Stuart mentioned. Although there are a good amount of UPSs, mostly for industrial use, that run on lithium ion packs. This is when you need like the absolute highest density in terms of power. In terms of how often should Jeff replace his batteries, most of these batteries for UPS usage are rated for a maximum of 5 years. I myself replace them for non-mission critical use. I replace them within the 3 to 5 year time frame. But for mission critical work, like say for machines that are broadcasting or machines that can't go down, I replace them within 2 years. And then I move those batteries off to the lower critical systems.
Okay, we're going back to Stuart to respond to Paul, and then Chris Fritchie.
Okay, firstly, it might be a terminology thing, but an inverter itself is just a box for taking DC and converting it to AC. It's not actually any way of cleaning up a power supply or the incoming power or providing battery backup. Okay, so you have a UPS that is always on, where it's actually creating a new clean sine wave. They're the sort where critical devices are on all the time. And then you have the type that switches, where you're normally getting mains and it will filter it and will then switch over. The difference is some equipment will go down within the time it takes the UPS to switch over. Mission critical equipment should always be on a full-time UPS. And the button nut snap decided to stick in my throat.
Okay, sorry. We'll go to Chris. Chris actually had a device that you're holding up. So Chris, did you want to?
Yeah, mine's not a full-time plugged in. I mean, I just have a regular battery backup. But if I'm doing something that's outside, or we're in hurricane country here, I have this thing. It's called a Jackery. It's basically it's a solar generator. And I can plug a solar panel into this 100-watt solar panel. This is 1,000 watts, and it has a pure sine that it puts out for 110. And I tested it, it'll run my system and 2 cameras plugged in at the same time. So there are a lot of backup. Here's the panel. 1 second.
Oh, okay.
This just folds out. It's a 100-watt panel, and you can put 2 of them in there. So as long as the sun's shining, you got power. So
I wouldn't run a 3-light kit off of it for too long, but yes,
no, that's not a light kit, but my box and the 2 6Ks are fine. So
right, or if you have a laptop or something like that, that'd probably do fine to keep you powered up in a remote location for a long time. Okay, looks like that takes care of that question for uninterruptible power supplies. So let's go ahead, Guy.
Next one's coming in from Brant Kruger in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Isn't that where you are, TJ? That's your neighbor. Brant, you guys should get to know each other.
Well, yeah, well, never mind.
Wide variety of backdrops on the panel. What are folks' opinions on semi-permanent home studios for presentations? Use a gray soft drop, build a set.
So we've talked about this a good little bit as Alex was kind of tuning up office hours and the look he was interested in. In the beginning, we had a lot of variety. And then we started talking about the fact that some consistency for people who are willing to go there might be a useful thing. So a lot of us went to a pop-up backdrop. You'll see probably, I'm seeing like 4, 5, 6, about 6 of those in the panel already. It makes things easy. I know for me every day, I'm in my regular office. What's behind me are 2 giant whiteboards, and I did not like the idea of trying to erase anything that was on there from client sessions. So putting up a pop-up behind me was a quick and easy way to always have a space ready that I can get set up in 3 or 4 minutes and then go live if I need to. So we got a lot of hands up. So let's go with Sky, TJ, Jeffrey, and then Chris, and then Roscoe.
Well, Doug Ferguson said that of all the people that changed the background, Sky actually accomplished something. So I actually ended up with, I think it's called, not the Zell, the big 7-foot pop-up, and also you taught me how to zoom tight, and what you said, and it's white on one side and gray on the other, and consequently to put a blue light to hit it gives you a variety. But when your wife needs it to go teach, she takes priority. So I ended up with the thermostat.
I am going to say just in the middle here that we buy these in tonalities, so you can get dark backgrounds, you can get light backgrounds, but what really determines the background split versus you is the kind of lighting you do for yourself versus controlling the lighting behind you. If you're in a room with a lot of windows and you get a medium gray background, that may read close to white actually by the time you get it going, unless you put enough light on yourself so that you can iris down and let the background fall off. So there's a little bit of trickiness to doing this. TJ was next.
So I guess to Brant's question, what is he looking to do? If he's looking to use this as a video production or photo production, I ran a photo studio, I had my own photo studio for years. And so, I had a setup where I had the ability to change backgrounds by big giant rolls of paper. So you can pull those down if you want to change colors. So you can also hang cloth backdrops up. So if you have enough space and want to have a lot of flexibility, that's a great thing to do. But you can change out your look without having to do necessarily a green screen. It can all be practical. Now, if you have the gear and the technical equipment necessary and the light necessary to do a really good chroma key, then, something like, Chris has got going with his giant, huge green screen set that he's got, for what he needs, there's also another option. I guess it kind of depends on what, like Mickey says, it depends. What the purpose of it is, whether or not you use just a simple backdrop. If you don't have the room like I don't in this room, I have a bookcase right behind me, 2 feet behind me, so I have a backdrop behind me. But if you've got room, like Alan, who from, I can't think of his last name, he's got a beautiful room with soft purple lighting in the background. He's got enough room to have it almost be like a set.
Nice. Okay. Jeffrey, and then Chris.
So I feel like I'm the OG on this whole thing because I remember Alex keeps saying, oh yeah, I love how Jeffrey's backdrop is. Basically, I've been doing YouTube videos for many, many years now. I've had backdrops with a lot of stuff in there. I've had backdrops with not much stuff in here. When I moved to this room to become Studio B, the first thing I just decided was I was going to paint the back wall. And the reason why I was painting the back wall was because I do have a chroma key that does drop down from the top, which I use like a blind shade system to bring it down. But the other thing was I was dead set on everything being modular. Like for instance, my desk that you see right here, my desk is actually on wheels. So if I need to move this out of the way, all I have to do is do that. The computer and everything moves with it. The monitors move with it. Same thing on the backdrop. The idea was I was going to get bookshelves and do certain segments. And then when I did that, I'd bring a bookshelf in with one with like knickknacks, like geek stuff, and maybe one with technical stuff, and just move it around, just like they would do at an NBC studio, or HLN does that, and other studios do that, where everything is on some sort of wheeled system. If you have the room for it, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Frischi?
Yeah, so I'll take, here, I'll zoom this out real quick so you can kind of see. This is, it's a pretty cheap alternative as long as you've got the room to do it.
Rocking the major green screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to. You can barely see the edges of the wall right there. So that's 16 feet. So it's 4 pieces of drywall. And if you have a back wall in your garage, you can easily put that up. I just bought this stuff. It's a video paint. I can look up who I got it from, but it's color 5711. And for the most part, I just painted the part of the floor right there in the wall, and it works out pretty good. And obviously, you can just key in whatever you want. But I needed to be able to stand back there and to kind of give you an idea for who's watching. This is about 12 feet behind me. So, I got more than enough space.
Chris, how did you light it? Because that's what everybody, when they're doing green screens,
Yeah,
first thing
okay.
they go to is what kind of light plot did you do?
I'm going to tip this up 1 second. You can kind of see these two big LED lights up there.
Yeah.
That's all I've got. And I've got about 3 pieces of white sheet over them. Oh, sorry. And to kind of diffuse the light, because they are super bright. I mean, they're very bright. And so I just put some old sheet over the top of them, just kind of diffuse it a little bit, but it evenly lights the screen. Good enough for the ATEM. So.
Fair enough. Looks great. And then we had, was it Roscoe who was in the last slot here?
Sure, I'll jump in. I put the links in. It's not up right now. Normally I have my gray screen, but that's the Christmas decorations are stored in the closet right up here in the guest room. So the wife can't get access to them if I put up the gray screen. So, but the only thing I'd say is the one thing missing is a steamer. Once you put up a cloth, or in this case, I think the one in there is like an acrylic or something, you need the steamer to take out the wrinkles.
Yeah, that's one of the kind of small advantages of the pop-ups is once they open up, they have a rigid rail around them that does stretch them a little bit. You still get corners. I don't know if you noticed, my bottom left corner can be a little bit wrinkly because of that. Chris, you wanted to pop back in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one of the reasons why we went with the painting the wall, excuse me, is I have some of the nice vinyl rolls. I've got a black, a white, and a gray and stuff. But you're spanning 10 feet. So it doesn't matter if I use pipe or if I use EMT conduit, it doesn't matter. Whatever you hang that on, there's always going to be a little bit of a crease in the middle of that vinyl. And there was just no way to take it out. So we just said, the heck with it. We'll just paint the wall green.
Okay, I know we've stuck on this for a while because people are very interested. Every time we get a chroma key question, I know there are just a lot of people, but we've only got another 5 minutes in the main part of the show before we switch to our topic of the day. So let's dive through these. Go ahead, Guy.
All righty, next one's up from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What's a great boom mic and mic holder that gives you a lot of range and easy mic removal?
I don't know if there's such a thing as easy mic removal. That is a visual effect thing to paint out a mic. If you're talking about getting one that's dipped into the shot out, you have to learn cloning and paint over, paint out, or one of those techniques in your NLE. But Stuart, do you have any suggestions real quick on a couple of brand names?
Yeah, but firstly, just a correction. Guy read out boom mic. The question is mic boom. So it's a different piece of equipment. So it's
he's looking for the actual support boom.
Yeah. My personal preference, I love my Rode gear, although I will admit that the 5-piece Rode boom is really heavy over long periods of time. If it's going to be in use all the time, grab the carbon fiber one. It's more expensive, but it is lighter. That's the easy to remove the mic from the thing that comes with the Rode mics. Yeah.
Let's go through this real quick because we got 3 more to get to. Yeah, I just wanted to note that the expensive boom poles that are carbon fiber and things like that can run a lot of money. You don't really need that if you're going to do a fixed holder. There are rigs that you put on top of a C-stand that will hold a boom in place, and you can get by with a very less expensive. In fact, even a painter's pole that you use with a screw-on painter's pole that you use with a roller can work for a boom mic circumstance if it is fixed. If you're just putting somebody in a chair and they're not going to move and they're not going to try to follow them. But let's get Jeff and Mickey in this real quick. Jeff, go ahead.
There are quick mic release clips, so you don't have to unthread the mic clip. They thread onto the top of a mic stand, and there's a second piece that threads into your mic clip, and they clip together with a quick release. I personally hate them because they jiggle around a little bit, but I will put a link for them in the chat.
Yeah, I misread that. He's just looking for great mic booms, and the painter's pole is not that. Mickey, what do you prefer? K-Tech, one of the others?
Yeah, I'm wondering, Paul, are you asking about boom arms or boom poles? Because those are quite different.
Yeah, boom arms. The
okay,
retractable
not
boom arms. Yeah. Sorry, but I got the terminology mixed up there.
That's okay. If you go into a grip catalog, you will find all sorts of arms. Some of them are on pivots. Some of them are in multi-sections. Some reach a long way. Some reach a short way. Microphone booms, as a search term, will get you a lot of variety of things. And they don't have to be terribly expensive. They're just going to sit in a fixed place. Let's move on. Go ahead, Mickey. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Guy.
What's that guy's name? TJ Asher asks recommendations for a UPS that can handle a Mac Pro tower.
Anybody know the current draw of a Mac Pro tower? Aren't UPSs generally, Stuart, relative to the amount of current that you need to? I think he's being a little tongue-in-cheek. He's tossed up the image of some gigantic diesel generator power supply.
We used to have things like this in the building at Global. They're a railway V12. They're huge.
If you're
but that'll handle a Mac Pro.
Emergency power for a 30-story or up building, that's your solution. Go ahead, Roscoe, real quick.
I was going to say on the G5, you actually have ones that have not a 20 amp plug, but actually have a 50 amp plug on them. The graphics cards sucked up that much power. So when you say Mac Pro, you got to be careful. You got to specify.
Got to move on. Let's keep going.
Next one's coming in from Bob Smith in Woodside. Is there a way to convert a webcam's USB output into HDMI so it could be used as a low-cost static POV camera for production?
Converting webcams to HDMI. We talked about that quite a few times. That is not as easy as it at first appears. Anybody find a solution? You'd think it would be a plug-and-play thing that you could buy from one of the vendors, but nobody that I know of has found that. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I know, a cheap Mac Mini. I mean, it's got HDMI coming out the back and you shove in the USB on the front end.
Yeah, that sounds like a complicated solution, but we worked on this for a while. I don't think anybody found anything. Go ahead, Guy, and toss through the next one. I think that's just a statement.
Yeah, this one
Bill,
is...
just quickly, didn't Courtney suggest using a like a stick type PC for doing something like that?
Yeah, I think he had one of those little small, it's not a Raspberry Pi, but some kind of a form factor PC that's very small to do that HDMI convert. I don't think we ever got that solved. I don't feel like we ever did. So it's a hard solution. Okay, let's keep moving along.
Alrighty.
Oh, well, Mickey has a thought. Go ahead, Mickey, real quick.
Yeah, I think Eric Hall was able to use, I think, a Raspberry Pi to do a USB webcam to HDMI conversion.
Okay, so go back in the archives and see if you can find that discussion. Let's move on to the last one before we can move over to our second hour camera discussion.
Yeah, I think this one from Mark Carter was just Zoom remote control, which we tested this, Beauty Bubble and I, in a one-on-one. We tried letting her control Final Cut through Zoom, just remote control. So it is possible to control a whole computer. So she was editing in my Final Cut timeline from wherever she's at. It was pretty cool. So that's
nice.
Most likely what his link is. All right, another one, last one up from Charles Klein in New York City. Good morning, everyone. Genelec just released GLM4. Any thoughts or experiences with GLM from the panel? I've been using the GLM4 beta with no issues.
Well, Genelec is one of the premium names in speakers, particularly for control room use. People absolutely love them, and they have a wide array both of models and of subwoofers if you want that 5.1 or 7.1 surround sound things, though make sure that you have a deep wallet because Genelec stuff is not inexpensive. Does anybody have any other any experience either directly with the GLM4 or any thoughts on it? No, for me, I'd have to go on reputation, and I don't think Genelec has ever sold any really bad stuff. It's just, what you can afford and what you're trying to do with it determines the level at which you get into that ecosystem. Okay, that said, I think we've managed to make it to the second hour questions. Our second hour today is going to be entirely about camera stuff, and we talk everywhere from low-grade stuff all the way up through. We've had long discussions with some of our friends about cinema cameras, the kind that you'd use on a major motion picture. It's always fun to talk about camera stuff. So TJ, let's dive into the first question. And for those of you who are watching now, this is your opportunity. If you ever have questions about how to operate or the kind of camera that you might want, features that particular cameras that you might be looking for in the future, if there is a task you have to do and you're wondering what the right camera for that level of production might be, you've got a lot of people here who've been shooting for a long time, and we'll give you the best advice we possibly can. So let's dive into the camera discussion.
All right, first one's up from TJ Asher. He asks, why does Stuart love his Scion so much? What makes that better than the other cameras?
Roscoe, you want to answer that? Oh, I'm just kidding you.
No, I'd love to hear Roscoe's response on that. Seriously, if he's got one, go for it.
To me, isn't a Scion a small compact car?
No, that's got an S in the front of the name.
Yeah. And Stuart's camera is a CION, right? And that was from
Yes.
Why am I forgetting
AJA.
AJA, right? So that was it came out about 4 or 5 years ago?
It launched in 2014.
14.
And I'll actually find the link and I'll put it in the discussion. Because I'm not even sure that AJA still has them listed on their website. I don't think they're actually still there. Nope, not there. Gone. Okay. Firstly, the first time I picked up a rolling shutter camera, I thought the camera was broken because it was just wobble the moment you try and pan with anything. It's like, what the heck is wrong with this thing? I actually returned it to the store thinking it was broken. And it's not until a lot later that I actually found out that what rolling shutter was. Now, this is when rolling shutter first came out with CMOS cameras. So I have a background.
Stuart, can you explain rolling shutter?
Yep. Rolling shutter is where you expose one line at a time rather than the whole sensor or rather you read out one line at a time rather than the whole sensor.
And so the problem with that obviously is you're panning, you have a temporal delay, a little offset in time, so that what the camera is pointing at the beginning of the shot is different every time the camera moves, so the lines get like stair-stepped instead of reading in a burst.
Yep. If anyone wants to have a look at Jay Leno's channel on YouTube, he's got a video up at the moment where he's test driving a Trans Am from the 70s. And as he's sitting there in the car going down the road, the vision of him is fine. The geometry is correct, but watch the buses that go past in the background, and they are rhomboid shaped. They're not square buses anymore because of that movement. It's a real easy way to see it. But for me, there we go. That's a lovely example of it. You also, if you have a look at vision of a propeller spinning in, or a fan spinning in rolling shutter, they do some amazing effects. But yeah, so for me, I can't stand the skew, and I can't stand the waste of time in fixing the footage in post, and that has a global shutter. It's the same global shutter as the Blackmagic production camera 4K, the Blackmagic Ursa 4K, and the Ursa Mini 4K, and the IO Industries Flare 12 MP, and there's a whole range of cameras that use the same sensor. For me, the other advantage was the ergonomics, being able to put it on my shoulder and have the weight of the camera going straight through my spine rather than out in front, because I have a herniated disc at L4. So if I put too much pressure on it, I'm in pain at the end of the day working. Whereas if I put that on my shoulder, even with it kitted out with a Lomo anamorphic on the front of it, and take the weight up to about 12 to 15 kilos if I include the Shogun, it's less tiring, although at that weight you want to be taking breaks really quick. That is actually lighter than a Red Epic. It's lighter than the Ursa Mini. It's lighter than the full-size Ursa. It's lighter than a Panasonic, Sony. Is it S35 or S65? The cameras are called, and much, much lighter than an Arri Alexa, and it just sits on the shoulder and it goes where I point it. I can also adapt any lens I want to it because I made my own lens mounts, which is the little silver thing you see at the front. Actually, I'll turn it slightly.
So are
Up
these
here
things
is a mount that I made myself.
Stuart, are these things do you still believe that, and because this is what the question asked, what makes that better than other cameras? If you were going to redo a camera now, would you find a Scion again, or do you think the industry has moved past that?
Some of the things that the industry has changed has moved forward. Color science has improved, sensor sensitivity has improved, readout has improved, but there is still no rolling shutter that can match the readout of a global shutter. What I would actually do if I could find the right person is write brand new firmware for that. I mean, that will do 120 frames a second DCI 4K raw, uncompressed, and I can completely disable the color science. So I actually get just what the sensor sees. That gives me maximum flexibility in grade. That is flexibility that really only the Alexa can match.
I think one of the lessons we're hearing here is
the other thing with,
go ahead.
the other thing with the sensor is if we wrote different firmware, you could turn on different modes that the manufacturer of the sensor created that none of the camera manufacturers actually used. That will do up to 150 frames a second in 4K 12-bit, but if I drop it to 10-bit, it'll do 300 frames a second in DCI 4K. That could be advantageous.
So
But
what you're seeing is
none of the manufacturers made the full use of
courses
it.
kind of discussion we've talked about before.
Yeah.
That's why you hear so many of these discussions that eventually get to what are you trying to do with it? Because if you need one of those features or things that this camera will do, it can push you from another camera to the camera that has that feature. It's really those subtleties that you learn the more you shoot and the more you decide what kind of work are you trying to do, and then what are the best tools for that kind of work. Chris Fitchie?
Yeah, hey, Bill, I thought it would be useful. Well, first of all, Stuart, that camera you just brought up, that screenshot, how much is that camera?
I didn't bring up the screenshot, but that was the AJA Scion.
I think Guy pinned. Yeah.
The launch price of those was absolutely ridiculous.
It might be useful when we're talking about this stuff, just so we don't have to have people ask the same question. Just give the price.
The launch price was $9,995 US. The price very quickly dropped to $4,995 US. And if you knew the right, since they're sold out in their end of line, I can reveal this. If you knew the right person to contact at AJA, like I did, I got mine for $2,995 US direct from the manufacturer.
So that was an era where we were seeing
that's an absolute bargain.
That happened a lot. You know, as Blackmagic started rolling out their cameras that had tremendous capabilities at prices that were not very far above camcorder prices, the industry changed, and they realized that you had a very high end, the Arri Alexa folks and the people working on films and things like that, they were still quite willing to dish out tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars to get into a fully professional ecosystem. The middle range of the cameras that I used to work with through the course of my career, which generally started about $10,000 and went up to maybe $20,000, those used to be mid-range cameras. That just got totally cannibalized by the amazing capabilities of less expensive cameras that just developed so quickly and were able to do so much more visually than even those $17,000, $18,000, $19,000 cameras of the era before. But there were always trade-offs. We didn't get removable lenses. We didn't get robust battery packs. We didn't get balanced audio in each era. We lost in order to gain better price points. And then eventually those things like balanced audio came to the cameras in the lower price points. And that made a lot of people able to shoot good video that weren't able to before. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, again, the ENG cameras were $60,000, but it was a full system. It was a turnkey. You had good audio, you had good professional input, you had good, you would change out the lenses depending on if you're going to put it in a studio or if you're going to take it out in the field. But again, a turnkey system. And then what we started doing was when Apple comes out with a $1,000 piece of software, all of a sudden you had to build it yourself. And that's when the DSLR came along. You had to build a full tricked out system yourself to get a real camera to do all of the things you could have done in the previous complete kit or complete system. So anyway, you can customize things, but I remember my dad building speakers as a hobby because you could do that in the early 70s or something like that. But you could also go buy an entire stereo system that was all glued in together and finely tuned, or you could build it yourself.
Well, and this followed technology. I mean, technology just took these huge leaps and bounds. I remember, since I used to work with analog cameras mostly in my broadcast days, when digital first came out, even DV25, which was the first DV cam and DV tape, I remember shooting something at the Boys and Girls Club with a young man sitting on a stool, and I had most of the lights cut off, and we spotlit him. And I remember looking at the blacks for that shot and thinking, my gosh, in all the years of working in analog, I have never seen blacks as solid and rich as I have on this $2,000 camcorder, even on broadcast level stuff, because we used to be kind of, the black pedestal was at 7.5 IRE, and digital allowed us to go down to 0 IRE. There were a whole bunch of things that just changed. That was one revolution. Then the DSLRs with large chips came through. That was another revolution. And these tools that were available to people at the lower end, they didn't really push out the high-end stuff, because the high-end stuff has capabilities that you can't even imagine unless you work with that kind of stuff. But man, the price performance ratio of cameras has just kept accelerating. And I'm looking at the board here, and people are really into this topic because we have a ton of questions in the queue. So let's get into them. Go ahead, Guy.
Next one's up from TJ Asher. What do people with many cameras, like Doug Ferguson, do to maintain their cameras? Any periodic maintenance regimens?
So that's interesting. So who has something? I mean, in the old days, when helical heads and tape was possible, you really needed to go in and clean heads and stuff like that. Most of these are all solid state sensors. They write to cards that are fixed, and they don't have many, if any, moving parts. There are some things, setting back focus and things like that. But Roscoe, talk about some.
I'd say just turn them on once in a while and power them up, because in the old days you had to actually replace batteries. Nowadays, I think there's just capacitors that are inside storing a lot of the internal electronic settings.
Yeah, without doubt, there are far fewer moving parts. I mean, the fact that your phone with 0 moving parts can record brilliant video tells you all you need to know about the fact that the days of mechanical tape paths and pinch rollers and all that stuff are long gone, thank goodness, because those were things that dried out and died over the lifespan of a camera. They don't do that anymore. Stuart, go ahead.
Same answer, but also add in dusting them off once in a while, making sure they're clean. Modern cameras are exceptionally robust with no moving parts. It's recording the memory devices was the biggest step forward in cameras after the development of the CCD.
Yeah, I will say this, and Alex has mentioned it a few times, and I agree with him 100%. The places where you can plug things in are often failure points. So if you're going to add a 3.5 millimeter headphone or an audio out or a mic in or something like that, be real careful about strain relief, because those kind of things, given leverage, can crack a board inside your camera and cause a huge repair bill that you don't need. Chris Ritchie, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this matters, but I got a handful of these 6Ks, and the one that I'm using right now, this one has literally been on 24/7 since March. It doesn't get turned off, and anything and everything I could plug into it is already plugged into it.
Yeah, they're just coming a long way. Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the local rental houses here send their cameras to the local RE service center every 6 months. For me, with regards to mixers, I send them off to Wisconsin to Sound Devices every 2 years.
Yeah,
just for periodic maintenance.
One thing on removable lens cameras, the lens mounts holding that heavy lens, and over the course of time, they can get a little wacky. And so sometimes you go back for factory service to make sure that everything is aligned correctly in the optical path. Go ahead, Stuart.
Chris, if you've left that camera on for so many months, please tell me you removed the factory battery, because it's probably toasted by now.
Yeah, I have the
lithium-ion batteries don't like being left permanently on charge.
Yeah, I don't have batteries in any of them, so I have the fake battery that runs to 110.
The quote battery power supply that's just wired power into it. All right, let's keep moving on. We've got a ton of questions here.
Next one's up from Jeff Francis. White balance options. Some cameras have control of color temp. Some have control of individual RGB levels. Why the difference?
So how the camera was designed. Stuart, you want to go deeper than that?
Yeah, if your camera's got different or individual RGB levels, it is probably an ENG camera for starters, because most cameras that are aimed at consumers are just straight up white balance and what have you. If you go into better DSLR settings, you can alter the colors and whatever, but it's more often going to be done with a color profile rather than RGB adjustments as such. What was the camera? Color temperature. This actually comes back to the question I was asked earlier. One of the things I like about that is being able to turn off the color information and record just what the sensor sees and do the color balance in post. That's one of the advantages of cinema cameras, that extra adjustable color balance that you can do later.
Yeah, if the camera in general has a little picture of the sun and then a little picture of a cloud and things like that, you're not going to get a lot of control over the white balance of your camera as you go through. Go ahead, Jeff Francis.
So Stuart, on a basic camcorder, where you have the ability to set color temperature by Kelvin number, but you also have the ability to point it at something and say, set the white balance here. Is that just picking the correct color temperature, or is it doing something else?
Yeah, it is. It's looking at what is white in the scene, which is what your color white is when you set your presets. I think I've mentioned before that the color temperature in Kelvin is the heat of a block of carbon, or the color of the light that block releases when it's heated to either, say, 3200 Kelvin or 5600 Kelvin. So that's what
I think to go farther
light coming out of it is.
On what Jeff is looking for, if you just have presets, a lot of cameras have presets. You'll set to 3200 Kelvin or you'll set to 5600, sometimes higher than that. If it has an actual white balance control, normally you'd put that white card under whatever the lights are you're shooting under, depress that control, and in a second, its circuitry is going to read that as white. And so it may then pop back and say, we're at 4900, because that's what the sensor's circuitry is reading there.
Where I was getting to, Bill, is that white balance is literally setting a number in the camera to match what is white from the light that's hitting a white card.
Yeah. Go ahead, Roscoe.
And you can get cards that are just slightly warm and slightly blue. So, you can get white balance cards that aren't white.
Yeah, I use those less. I used them in the early parts of my career because now you've got so much color control, usually in your NLE or other place, that doing those little shifts in post, I don't really particularly care to off my sensor from natural in the shoot. I'll do that in post if I need to do it in post, but everybody's different. Maybe you like using that. Go ahead. Let's go to the next question.
Next one is from Marantha, Spanish Church in Grand Rapids. What solutions are available for auto tracking cameras to follow a speaker on stage?
There used to be little devices that did that in the B&H catalog and the MarkerTech catalog, a little thing with two arms out and two sensors, and it would try to do it. We've gone a long way from those days, and Guy will explain some of them.
Yeah, right now there's some software that you can download from Panasonic. It's free for 30 days or 90 days, one of the two, to use with their cameras. And it's some of the best out there. What you got to be careful with these is when people turn their head, like if they're writing on a chalkboard or if they go to point at something, and the AI loses control. And so you want one that knows things, and they're getting better and better all the time. But TTZ Optics has some, Lumens has some. But the best right now, and I'll try to bring one in next week because I just borrowed this camera from Panasonic and I'm installing the software. So I will come on and we'll see what it looks like. But the UE 100 is the model number, and the UE 150 at the highest end. And then it's the auto tracking software from Panasonic is what I would be taking a look at. And on the cheapest end, Facebook portal, it's got some auto tracking on there. You get to see a glimpse into what's happening. The industry is shifting, that's for sure. I don't know how good any of this stuff is going to wind up getting at the lower tier, under $1,000, because it's basically just using the sensor. It's not actually using optics to zoom in. Right.
So most of us have seen on our phones that little square that pops up on faces. Are they just tracking human faces? And is that why it gets lost when you turn off? Is that really kind of what's happening? Actually,
on the Panasonic software, you can dictate which person to follow. So if there's 5 people on the stage, but there's a main presenter, you snap headshots, and then you say, this is Bill, and it follow Bill only, and it'll lock on Bill. Yeah, it's crazy. So if it's the lead singer of a band, and we're going to see more of this as COVID, production has changed things. So we're going to see, unfortunately, some people lose their jobs to robots, our worst fear. But sometimes it's less hotel, less taxis, less meals. And so PTZ cameras are going to be a godsend for some of our productions and
Embrace our
remote
new
control,
digital
people on the other side.
overlords. TJ and then Roscoe and then Stephen Kimbrough. Go ahead, TJ.
Does the Brio, which is, I believe it's a 4K camera meant to be able to be panned and zoomed, as it were, does that have any remote or auto tracking features at all?
The Brio doesn't, but the Huddle Cam does. And it's not the greatest in the world. It does figure out, though, if there's one person, two person, three. So it's meant for conference room. So if one person gets up and leaves, it's smart enough to shift and concentrate just on the one. So there's a lot going on here. It's not just simple stuff. And I'm under NDA on some stuff, but there is more stuff coming. So it's just got to get real.
I think TJ was next, and then Roscoe.
I'm good. Roscoe.
Oh, Roscoe.
Okay. Yeah. No. I guess one of the questions is how large is the church? Because there are things that you have to be 100 feet away, but more and more you can put. I put a link into a Mevo, which is a 4K camera that does a 720p grab that tracks kind of what you're. It's not a mechanical head. It's just all done with the lenses. So it captures the 4K, but then it will find the person and track them around at 720p. And if that's acceptable for your audience, great.
Stephen Kimbrough.
That covered it.
Okay, there you go. Moving on to the next question, Guy.
Next one is from Marty in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm researching PTZ cameras for installing on an auditorium. What specs and characteristics should I be looking out for?
Okay, well, we're going to be talking probably about lens throw in an auditorium and the ability to get something, unless you can find a way to put something in an auditorium that's close to the stage. Roscoe, you want to dive in on that early?
Well, yeah, Jeff and I think Jeff Francis just bought a set and he can say what he bought, but it had to do with also how well it could deal in low light, because if it's an auditorium, sometimes the productions are not going to come in with great lighting, and if they don't, then you're going to have to look at a sensor. So I think we ended up with the high-end, the Panasonics. I don't even know the model number right now. It's been so long since we ordered them. They haven't come in yet. But so the Panasonics, and I think they had I want to say a 1-inch on the back, but they're the $9,000.
Sometimes in my experience, theaters are the hardest things to shoot, because you'll get like an old theater and it'll have a completely dark stage and then a carbon arc spotlight in the back that's throwing this gigantically bright circle of light on people, and you're either exposing for one and everything else is just a black hole. It can be challenging in theaters. Jeff, go ahead and continue.
Yeah, Roscoe had a bigger budget to work with than we did, because those 1-inch PTZs are about 10 grand. And so we went with the $3,000 Panasonic, I think the model number is the 40. The reason we chose those was they had a 30x zoom. And so that was where we could get. Most everything else had a 20x zoom, and the 30x gave us closer shots of things. I would love in our bigger auditorium a bigger sensor, but that'll be for later upgrades. And we've been working, since we've not had audiences, or we've had limited audience, we've been working with lighting designers to let them look at the video and change their lighting design as they're doing the lighting.
Oh, that's
so they're
nice.
not necessarily lighting for audience, they're lighting for the video streaming production.
Which is a brilliant way to change your thinking if you can, because it used to be that everybody lit for the performance in the theater. Nowadays, your largest audience could well come from the internet and from distributing the system. So shifting your thinking to lighting for the crowd in the theater to lighting for the internet audience is, I think, smart thinking. Let's do TJ, then Guy, then Sky.
Back to Marty's question about specs and characteristics. I guess one of the things is where in the auditorium are they going to be placed? To get back to the lens throw thing that Bill mentioned, is how far away are they going to be, and what field of view do you need that camera to have? If it's going to be a pan issue, then you're going to probably want to have more longer lens throw, which gets you zoomed in tighter, so that you can actually pan it and get close-ups, there we go, of the people on the stage as they are talking. And so the lens that goes with that camera will be a big thing to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to go to Guy and then Sky after that. But I want to make one little note in the between. As somebody who edits video a lot, I'm always looking for a variety of shots, including wide establishing shots, mediums, medium close-ups, and sometimes extreme close-ups. When you get cameras that are a long way away, you often find that your closest angle is maybe knees up or something like that, even if you put a big lens on something. And what you lose there is intimacy. When you really can push in on somebody who's doing something emotional and get them in a tight headshot, or even sometimes closer than that, it really builds a unique and unusual rapport with the people watching it, as it's the kind of human equivalent of being right up in somebody's face, close to a hug or something like that. So the farther back you push, I think the colder things feel, but sometimes it's really hard to get cameras positions. You can do that in a live theater kind of circumstance. Guy and then Sky. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, this is just right up my alley because the shoot that we're doing here in about an hour and a half is going to utilize that camera that Roscoe just got that I have on loan from Panasonic. It's the UE150, and it's kind of surprising that it's not full NDI on the out. So Marty, if you're researching these, really do your homework, because Bird Dogs right now have full NDI out and they're like $2,900. I know Brian Anderson, you might want to have a chat with him. He just bought a 3-pack, so you can get 3 with a controller right now. 3 1-inch sensor cameras for the price of the one. The difference that I'm seeing is the motors, the motors and the software. So the Panasonic motors are unbelievable. I mean, they are so smooth. And then the Panasonic software, you could set up 100 presets on a touchscreen. And today we're just going to be touching the shot. So we need to cut from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It's just boom, 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 boom. And it's so smooth. I mean, you got to see it. So hopefully some YouTube videos have some demos up that you can take a look at. But, you know, it comes at a price. The UE100 is the smaller one, and that one is full NDI. So the benefit of NDI is, you know, 1 cable, power over Ethernet, long run. The other cameras, you're going to be running HDMI or SDI, and the signal can degrade if you're going analog, which God forbid you'd have to do anything analog. But pay attention to SDI because it's 300 feet or so on the longest length that you could run. So it depends on your auditorium and how high up.
Sky and then Chris Frishy for finish.
I'm very interested in this question because I now have a PTZ camera to play with. And the thing I'm realizing is trying to match it against my Panasonics that I've got. It's a whole new experience. Also, as Guy talked about, how many cables are you dragging back and forth? And the other thing I'm realizing too is I'm getting flicker, and I'm not sure if it's because I'm crossing my HDMI with my power, or if I'm getting a bad hertz issue with my light sources. And I have to figure all this out by 5 o'clock tonight. And the other thing is, yeah, we may not be using the PTZ tonight. We'll find out at noon. Anyway, the Shane Hurlbut, the DP, also talks about which do you light in what order, because when he would traditionally light, he would bring all the lights in and do the set of a film or a TV show that he's doing, and then he would bring the camera in. Then he started using the Canon, the 150 and the 300s and the 200s and things like that. And because of the light sensitivity of the sensor, he would actually put the camera on first and then light backwards to the camera. So again, technology has flipped tradition.
Chris Ritchie?
Tag, you're it.
Oh. Yeah, hey, Guy, sounds like you're going to be very busy this afternoon, but is there any way you can get some behind the scenes footage of you running that deal? That'd be great to see. And,
I'm actually going to be remote, and I'm coming in through Zoom. It's a webinar, and they're going to be back at the office controlling everything. So, and then we got people coming in. Sky, one thing that Jeff Woodgren said earlier in one of the PTZ forums was, with the PTZ optics, he said to hold up a big white board and white balance that thing. He said he's shocked at the amount of churches that he goes to when he white balances them, how much more pristine the picture is, because it's not fighting to go, you know, through the spectrum of all the colors of the rainbow.
Is there a magic software to hit that white balance button, or just
did you get the remote control, or you can go into the back end?
I don't think I did.
There's either a remote control, or you can go into the back end. Hit me up offline. I'll actually, I'm going to be on a shoot. I will be able to help you tomorrow.
After the shoot. Thank you. R.I.P.
Let's go real quick, and then let's move on because we still got a big.
Yeah, just as I was doing all the searching, one of the things that people turned me on to was Scarhoj. I don't know how you say it. SKAAR.
Scarhoj.
Scarhoj. HOJ. Right. They have all the adapters, all the magic little boxes. They talk PTZ all day long. Just go there because you need to understand you're going to add them to your system somewhere. So just go there, look at what they're doing. It's incredible products. They do have controllers and the whole thing, but they also have these magic little boxes that convert languages and talk to your PTZ cameras and stuff.
Love magic. Nothing up my sleeve.
Okay, moving along. Next question.
Next one up is from TJ Asher. How do people go about determining what camera to use when planning a shoot?
Experience, and go ahead, Stuart.
Well, experience is a good way to start. The other one is what cameras do you have already, especially as your budget's low. But it also is dependent on what you're filming. I mean, if you're filming something like I do with motorsport, I do that with IP-based security cameras because they are effective and I can put them right near the track without it being at risk to an operator. There's no one standing there who can be hit by something coming flying off the car. If I'm filming sports and what have you, I want a global shutter because I'm going side to side all the time. If I'm doing drama, something like a short film and what have you, something like a Blackmagic cinema camera or the Blackmagic Ursa Mini G2, which a mate of mine has just bought, is absolutely fabulous for those. It depends solely on the subject matter.
Fair enough. Mickey, real quick, and let's move on after that. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah. First off, yeah, the form factor plays a huge role. Depends on what you're shooting. Because like, say as Stuart alluded to, like say for example, like run and gun ENG shoots, you want something that you could rig up really and handle in a situation where you literally have to run. For more for sets where you can do more setups, you'll want maybe a cinema camera, which would typically be needed. You need to be able to build it out a bit to have a lot of accessories, like wireless focus assists, Cinetape, and all that. It really depends on your use case. And then on top of that, once you know what sort of form factor you need to go for, DP cinematographers, whatever you want to call them. I know Stuart might say something about that. They do camera tests. They line up 2, 3, 4 different models and see what works best for the look they're going for. They'll get stand-ins or even sometimes the actual actors in the types of costumes they would be wearing. Because like say period films might require specific fabrics and specific color tones, and also light up that person in the type of lighting they will do for that film itself, and see what sensors work best. And another layer on top of that is talking throughout the entire chain that image would go through, because the camera doesn't only affect production, it affects pre-production, it affects post-production, especially post-production, a lot. So you talk to everyone going through the chain and determine what works best for the entire production as a whole.
Very comprehensive, and I think that covered it really well. Let's move on to the next one.
Next one's coming in from our own Jeff Francis in Columbia, South Carolina. How does one properly use a zebra pattern to adjust exposure?
All right, let me start this as quick as I can. I first ran into that on the black and white viewfinders of broadcast cameras. And zebras, if you've never seen them, you turn it on and you get a diagonal kind of a crawly pattern across things that determine an exposure level, usually measured in IRE. On the better cameras, you could set that. You might have it set at 70 IRE, or some cinematographers wanted it at 80 IRE. If you're doing a white screen shoot, maybe you want the zebra set at 100 IRE so you can make sure that your white screen is 100% white left to right. However you set it, you're going to typically, like if I had one set for 70 IRE, which is where my cameras used to be when I was shooting shoulder mounted a lot, I would look at the person's face, try to zoom into a medium shot of their face, and make sure that the zebras were across good pieces of the bright reflective places of their face, but I had some difference between the brightest area and something next to it. I didn't want the whole face blown out with zebras. I wanted some difference there. And that's going to tell me I'm going to get a difference in shot between their highlights and less than highlights, which makes the face look more three-dimensional. So that's the basic way. I will say that the new kind of form of zeros is false color, and it's exactly the same thing where it maps pixels of a certain IRE to a color. But in false color, you can say, make all my highlights that are at 100 yellow, then back off and make everything pink that's at 80 IRE, and then everything that's at 60 IRE make blue. And you can start to look at your scene in false color and see where your highlights, where your shadows are, and exactly what the IRE level of them. So that's that's how I use zebras in the old days and have moved into false colors in the new days. And usually it's built into monitors. You don't really have to get a separate thing. So hopefully that took care of it. And so we're going to move on because we still got a bunch of questions and we've only got 20 minutes left.
Tom Weiland out of San Francisco, California says, I have a Sony VL1 for vlogging. I know Paul on the panel has one. What do Paul or the panel like best about the camera?
And actually, I think it says ZV1. I don't think I've ever heard of a ZV1. Is that an actual Sony or have I got it wrong?
And if it's the one I'm thinking of, it's very similar to the one that I'm using, which is the Panasonic G100 in that same form factor. The big thing about it is it's got that flip around screen. So for the $700 range and it comes with a lens, that one is non-removable. And so what I like about the G100 is I popped on, $1,000 really nice lens that I had from a GH5, and now I'm using that, and it's such a compact camera. So both in that lineup, they're really small. So if you want something to kind of carry around, I'm just using it because it's a webcam to me, essentially. So I'm kind of burning it up. But like Chris Fritchie's using a $2,500 camera to leave on 24/7. I'm using this one to leave on quite a bit through the day. And then I'll hook it up to an Atomos Ninja if I need better color, because the bummer about these smaller cameras is that they do record in a format that is throwing away a lot of the color information. So if you're going to get one of those, they're great, but they can actually be better just by plugging them into a external recorder.
Yeah, and vlogging is a different beast. I mean, we have young people doing a lot of that where they want to hold the camera out at arm's length and put themselves into a scene, describing the scene or describing the event that they're in the middle of covering. And that's a different kind of a program than we've seen before. We didn't see a lot of that, particularly when cameras were shoulder mounted. You couldn't very well put a mirror in front of yourself and take a picture of yourself with a camera on your shoulder. So let's continue to move on. Go ahead, Guy.
Up next is Charles Klein. Camera. What secondary cameras are the panel using for their wide angles, studio shots, etc.? Currently using a Pocket 6K for my main camera. Looking for something simple, plug and play, considering the Brio.
It depends on what you want to hook it to. The Brio and most of those, I think the Brio can go HDMI out, right? Am I right, Guy? No, it can't. So really, if you're using something like an ATEM, I'm using a little Canon as my release shot up there. It's a VC20 or something like that. Is it Canon or is it Panasonic? Maybe it's JVC. I don't even know. I put it up there a long time ago, but it's an inexpensive camera that has HDMI out. That's what I wanted. It's really a camcorder. I think it cost me maybe $150, and it's perfectly good for a secondary shot like that. TJ, what are you using?
I also am using a camcorder. I've had this camcorder for at least a decade. It's a Canon Vixia something or other. I don't even know. It's like Vixia 100 or something. It was one of the early high def camcorders that allowed you to record on an SD card. And Mickey's waving at himself. And but it has clean HDMI out, which was a surprise to me. I'd never actually tried to do it. It works, so I have that plugged into my ATEM, and it's just there because I had it.
There you go, Guy.
Yeah, similar to that Brio. So the Brio's in the $200 range. This is the Huddle Cam for $299, and it does have an HDMI out. And the other cool thing is it has a remote control, so you can frame up your shot with the remote control. So when I look at the Brio, I go, if you're just going to be setting it up and leaving it there, great. That's a good example of something to pick up in that $200 price range. But for the $300 price range, now you got a dual purpose camera that you can use for cooking shows into an ATEM and things like that. And you don't have that problem that we had earlier with that question was, how do I turn my USB camera into an HDMI camera, which is like there is a $200 device that you can get, but now you're spending a bunch of money to make, go the opposite way.
Yeah,
So,
I want to buy.
yeah,
I want to get a $200 device to turn on my $80 camera. Paul Wallace, real quick, and then let's move on.
I'm circle back to the previous question. This is the ZV-1, incredible camera. It's got the flip screen. It's got this grip that's amazing that lets you control the camera, and you can change the grip. If you really want to find out about it, iJustSeen has some great YouTube videos on it. Just look up iJustSeen and the ZV-1. You'll get a very entertaining video.
Yeah, that's the first camera that I ever saw that I think had been specifically designed for self-shoot vlogging, period. That's everything they've made in terms of accessories are to enhance that use case. Go ahead, John Preto, real quick.
So the guys at Demolition Ranch was one of the influencers. So Sony invited all the influencers back in like November of last year to review this camera. And the problem that he had with it for vlogging was the rejection on the rear mic. So when he turned the camera around, the audio would dip down significantly. So he went back to his old Canon camera.
Interesting. So one little thing they didn't think through exactly like they might have made it less than ideal for somebody who uses that all the time. I think we've seen that a lot. Let's continue to move along. We've got how many? We got 6 more, and we've only got, well, we've got a few minutes, so we're okay. Let's keep diving through though.
All right, this one comes in from Brody Hefner. VidCams, when setting up video camera using HDMI output for streaming, which video file format is preferred, and are there formats to be avoided?
Formats usually have to do with how it's encoded and written to something. Do the cameras themselves have different formats? Technically, Roscoe Jones, I mean, the different.
Yeah, I think they're just asking frame rate. Do they want 24 frames per second HDMI? Do they want 29.97 or 30? I would just go 30, you know.
Yeah, I guess there are cameras that put out like long-op and other forms of video, which you could say would be a format, but I didn't think that was where he was going. Stuart, do you have?
Yeah, H.264 would be the easiest one for output for streaming, but just like Roscoe said, 30 frames per second. Even here in Australia with Power Country with doing 25 frames a second, if I'm sending it to YouTube, I'll convert it to 30 frames because it just looks better when YouTube recompresses it.
I'm actually surprised that H.264 has had such a long and robust tail on it. I thought when I heard about H.265, 7-8 years ago, maybe more than that everybody was going to shift over because of its advantages, but I'm still seeing a lot of stuff encoded H.264 that looks great. So
265 is a licensing issue. That's the reason why.
Oh, is it? They managed to
time
make
to
the money
market.
stuff. Yeah, so the money stuff got in the way of the technology. Well, we've never seen that happen before. Let's continue to move along.
Alrighty, next one's from Mark Harder in Brooklyn, and he says, did anyone notice Guy seems to have the new Apple headphones hanging right behind him? Quick review. So here they are. They came in yesterday. Pretty fancy. They've got.
I shouldn't have said anything because it got to my cat. Somebody pin him. There we go. Ooh, the mesh.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, those just pop. The ear cuffs just pop off too. Let me take one off. Yeah, and they are labeled inside. I don't know if you can see that in the light.
Did you try Atmos on them yet, Guy?
Yeah, I watched a little bit of some Disney stuff. I watched The Mandalorian. That for spatial imaging, they're amazing. I listened to a bunch of stuff on Tidal last night too. There's the Crown, the digital Crown right there.
Do they function like AirPod Pros, Guy, in that you put them on and they just connect and launch without any hassle?
Yeah, the thing that I really got them for was running on the Peloton. They were fantastic for that. This will actually pause and turn the volume up and down. And then the other button here is to change whether you want transparent mode. So the noise cancellation is pretty slick. And then these, you can get different colors. So they just pop off like that. And that's what's inside of there.
Where's the,
I was wanting a,
where's the brand name on those, Guy? Where's the branding?
I don't think that there is any branding on them. That's the side.
No little apples?
No Apple logo on those at all.
It's like,
they probably do have a serial number that is so microscopic that without some sort of scientific instrument, you can't read it. Apple is notorious for doing that.
They sound fantastic, though. I listened to so many different tracks last night to the point where I was getting ear fatigue. They were not as loud as I thought they would be, and the bass isn't as deep. And then towards the end, I started to get just ear fatigue, and it started to sound a little bit shrill. But the first thing I noticed was just the imaging. You can figure out where things are. Like on the Bonnie Raitt Silver Lining album, I was like, wow, that instrument's panned to where it's like a 45-degree away from me. So I was starting to visualize where performers were in the scene. So that's fantastic. When the imaging on them is just amazing, especially when watching Mandalorian. I watched a little of Mukana, or not Mukana, one of those Disney shows, and I was just to test out some kid. Yeah, just to test out some of the kid shows, and it was amazing. So I like them. I'm really impressed. So, because I would listen to stuff really loud, and I was going to get a system for the home, but I can't listen to it loud because the kids always complain. So I'm like, all right, I'll go into my own little world and just get myself some Atmos in my ears.
So I'm happy. So those are what, $300 or $400?
No, they're
$5.99.
$5.99. Whoa!
They're 12-week back order, and they're selling on eBay for like $800. I was happy to get them.
1 second, guy. Let me rename myself to Benjamin.
For those of you who are not regular viewers of the program, we had young Benjamin come in when school was out. Really nice young man, and Mickey, or not Mickey, but Guy. Said, well, you don't have good enough equipment. You're doing a really great job. So send him something for free. So I think Mickey now wants to be Benjamin for a day.
Well, it's so funny too, because then I was in a meeting with him, and he came in with that headset, and I was in my conference room, and he sounded better than me.
Good. That's what we need to do, is support the next generation coming along. That's excellent. All right, let's keep going back to the questions and see if we can close out on time. We've got 10 minutes and 4 or 5 questions still to go through.
Next one up is from Michael Vosbein. Does an iPhone 10 or newer have a better camera than a Logitech Brio?
Ooh, that's a tough call. Better. What is, at least it's not asking that against a DSLR lens. I don't know whether, Logitech has surprised me with the quality of the images, but it is a fixed camera. The phones, if nothing else, now are built with camera arrays. So you have often a wider, a medium, and a closer shot just with the multiple arrays. They do a lot of computational photography inside the processor of the phone to do special things. And I don't think the Brios do any of that. But for kicking out just a clean, acceptable image, the Brio is a pretty amazing camera. So what does anybody else think? Anybody else? Let's do John Preto, and then we'll go to Roscoe, and then Mickey.
Sorry, I've had both. This is a Brio right here, Gen 1 Brio, which doesn't hold the settings. Every time I boot my machine up, I have to go in, and you see me in the early morning adjusting the.
Not that you're bitter about that.
Yeah, so I've never got a really clean look out of any of my iPhones. I even have the 12 right now using Cameo. And I think the Brio looks better. That's just personal opinion.
That's okay. My personal opinions are absolutely fine here. Roscoe?
I mean, you really have to know what the purpose is. I assume he's looking for a webcam because, I mean, they're really not in the same market. But the only thing I was going to say is when we went to COVID, I could tell the big difference between the students that had an iPhone 8 and an iPhone 10, 11. And boy, those are phenomenal cameras on the iPhone 11. Phenomenal.
Okay, Mickey, and then TJ Asher, and then Guy.
Yeah, well, I don't have either, but I would imagine, like, I can't really compare the sensors and the optics themselves, but I would imagine that the iPhone is doing a bit more computation in the background, a bit of Apple trickery, magic in the background to get a relatively better image out of the cameras that are on their devices.
TJ?
I guess if you're looking to use the iPhone as a webcam, and if you're comparing it to a Brio, that means you don't have any HDMI input. So then you're using like the lightning cable or going over Wi-Fi to get the camera signal into your computer. And with that, there is some limitation with the iPhone about being able to tweak the exposure settings or lock it in My son and I have been playing with this, and we haven't really found anything that really allows us to lock in, just like, okay, set my exposure to here and keep it there and not start messing with the exposure if you move around or whatever. So if anybody has any software that does that for the phone, that would be useful.
Well, Filmic has a tap exposure set. It's
but that does HDMI. That's not
okay.
That's not going through the lightning cable, and that's
I'm checking on Cameo right now. I think it does, TJ. I'm going to check.
Okay.
What about just using a lightning to HDMI cable? I guess they make actually ones that are powered.
But the whole point is
HDMI.
if you don't have HDMI, if you don't have an HDMI input like an ATEM or any of the Elgato converters, if you're just using USB in.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
Yeah. It seems to be that's been a hole in the market for a long time here. But Guy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to recommend that Filmic Pro app. When the guy from Filmic came into this show and nobody knew what camera he was using, he just kind of silently stood there. I was like, man, that looks really clear. And that's what it was. It was Filmic Pro on an iPhone 11 at the time, and it's super sharp. So John Prado, I was going to recommend getting that Lightning to HDMI adapter and see what your thoughts are with that and running into your switcher.
Yeah, I've used my phone on an HDMI adapter a good little bit here in office hours to show things, but also just as tests out. And I've been kind of surprised at it. I mean, it is what it is. It's a phone. It's a general purpose device that also has a camera. But we've all heard those stories that Apple has massive teams of engineers working on the phone camera system because it is such a differentiator. And there's so much bragging rights involved in our cameras are better than yours on our phones. Go ahead, Stuart, your comments.
Yeah, just with the phones, as a general rule, if you get in a low light situation, their encoding, because of how far they compress the vision, the encoding gets really bad really quickly. So I would actually say, to Michael's original question, if you're in a low light condition, the Logitech is going to have a superior image. If you've got good lighting, the iPhone is going to have a superior image.
Here I was thinking that I was ahead of the game and we didn't have that many questions. Then we run into this question, which we could spend about 2.5 weeks on. Go ahead, Guy.
Brian asks, what's the dividing line between a camcorder, an ENG camera, and a cinema camera? Where would a tricked out DSLR mirrorless or Blackmagic cinema camera on a shoulder rig land on that continuum?
This is going to be, we're going to let Stuart start, but Stuart, you are constrained to 30 to 45 seconds because this could go on for days.
Oh yeah. So quickly, an ENG camera, as we talk about it, is a particular form factor for the ergonomics. But the difference between an ENG camera and a camcorder is blurring, because you now get very high featured camcorders that are issued out to do ENG work. Camcorders are generally consumer-based video cameras, whereas an ENG camera and a cinema camera is professional-based. That said, Steven Soderbergh has done feature films on iPhones, so the lines are blurring, and for a cinema camera, it can be anything that gives you the tool you need to get the images out to convince the viewers that you are doing a good storytelling effort.
Okay, Sky, real quick, and then I'm going to finish up with a couple of comments.
Jackson Pollock is famous for using JCPenney's house paint to create his art. They're trying to recover it now, and they can't, because they can't get that same texture. That it was 30-year house paint, and it's been splatter paint for over 50 years now. So if you're doing art, whatever the tool you have in your hand, ENG is because you're out gathering news. Electronic news gathering is what ENG stands for, and you're going to be at some really rough situations that you want your equipment to work. The price point that we can now get into, you almost have a disposable equipment. Your cameras, when the DV camera came out, they would buy them, and physically they cost less for the entire kit than one piece of tape stock. So consequently, the question is, how long do you want your equipment to last? Don't expect the $1.99 thing to be your bread and butter.
if
Okay,
you're
let's wrap
bringing it
this up because we've got 3 more questions, not just 2. I'm going to say that to me, ENG cameras are designed for one person to operate them. That's where they came from. A news shooter goes out and shoots everything. Cinema cameras, true cinema cameras are designed for team operation, focus pullers and other people who are going to be doing attendant to the camera. DSLRs are a tool for one thing that turned out to be fabulous for another thing, and everybody adapted them, but you have to add a lot of stuff to make them as useful as an ENG camera for doing ENG type work. And for cinema work, you have to add even more stuff. That, I think, is the difference between those 3 classes in a nutshell. Let's move on. And next
one's from James Babbitt in San Diego with the Sony A7. Have you used the small rig cage? Would you put the Adamus Ninja 5 on the cage or mount it on the side handle?
Oh, how much stuff do you want to hang off your rig? This is the, I love, cages are fabulously utilitarian. It makes it easier to keep all the things you need in one kind of area and not have everything hanging off and having to mount it on a tripod. You can still go mobile. The downside to them is you can mount so many things on them, and I have been guilty of this at some times, where the rig is just way too side heavy or top heavy, and you're really kind of fighting your rig all the time. I remember a shoot where I had an Atomos Ninja, I think, bolted on with a relatively large monitor on top of a DSLR, and I put handrails on it in a cage, and it was still way too top heavy to make me happy. So I think there are limits to the cage idea, but when you need them, they're fabulous. Let's go just 30 seconds each. TJ, Stuart, go ahead.
I'd mount it on the cage to center the weight over the camera body.
That's a good tip. Stuart?
Same location, slightly different reason, is because when you hold the camera and you're looking down the center line of the lens, you want the viewfinder in front of you as well for that form factor. So that way, where you point the viewfinder is where you point the lens.
Fair enough. Okay, moving along to the next one. We've got 2 questions, and we're right at 9 o'clock, so let's knock them out real quick.
Another one from TJ Asher. Are there any modern cameras that have global shutter, or is everything now a rolling shutter?
Stuart, real quick.
Not currently in production. Blackmagic have been trying for a while to do a dual rolling and global one, but haven't succeeded yet.
There you go. Excellent. So Tim Erskine's question is the last one. Go ahead, Guy.
What camera system would you suggest for doing high school sports where you're using a TriCaster first switcher?
So John Preto.
So hit Doug up, and this is exactly what Doug does. He uses one of the Sony cameras, and he's using in his truck a TriCaster.
So pop a question in Mukana, or better yet in Discord in the camera section there. Go ahead, Roscoe. Any suggestions? And Mickey,
smaller image center means more stuff stays in focus, which makes it easier for the camera operator to get better shots or shots that last longer in sports.
There you go. In high school sports, you do not want a gigantic shutter and shallow depth of field. You want the opposite. You want everything in focus all the time. Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the previous question. The Komodo, Red Komodo, has a global shutter.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so there is something. All right, I think that's it. Thank you all for enjoying office hours. We hope you enjoyed the discussion today. We will be back tomorrow, and in fact, tomorrow, a special guest. So it's going to be a particularly interesting show. I hope we see you all tomorrow morning, first thing. Thank you all for coming today, and take care of yourselves overnight. We'll see you in the morning. Bye-bye.